similar fate by virtue of being employed by private, state, or federally run hospitals, prisons, corporations, etc., that require the same decorum. If this measure is passed in its current form, the ministries of those who operate outside the doors of the church will also be threatened. In fact, it will most likely mean that many of these ministries will have to cease to exist, and the denomination and the kingdom will be poorer for it. So, as I close, it is tempting and much easier for us to live in a black and white, all or nothing world. Unfortunately, that is not the world in which we live. I ask that we as a denomination and a council consider the significant unintentional impact that such action would have on many of our brothers and sisters who are out in the field giving their lives for the church and the kingdom. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Member. There is a speaker at mic 1.
Brother Moderator, my name is Chuck Ramsey. I'm from North Georgia. I rise to speak in favor of the motion, and I rise as a co-signer of the original motion, and I rise as a son of this denomination, a proud son. And I'm thankful for all of the fathers who have raised me, including my own father, who was a son of this denomination. I'm thankful. Now I'm a proud father myself of sons who are being raised in the institutions, being impacted by our platforms and our places of higher learning. We all know that the culture is rapidly changing. We all know it. The culture is becoming very antagonistic to our biblical faith. We're not in a Christian nation. We're not in a post-Christian nation. We are in an anti-Christian culture. In this culture, our tribe, we find that our practices are somewhat vulnerable. Therefore, we need God's wisdom today to help us to effectively adjust so that we can lovingly, graciously continue to build God's kingdom. The issue that we have, and the reason for this motion comes because our children are being taught in our institutions, platforms, and places of trust things that are contrary to our beliefs and our statement of faith. The mechanisms that we do have in place to effectively deal with this, they seem to be stressed, as the facts are that we have been slow to deal with these issues at all. This is very detrimental to the future of our beloved denomination. I'm a friend and a supporter, a longtime supporter of these institutions. Everybody in my family, like many of you, on both sides of our family, we are products of these institutions. I had a son graduate in May from one of them. One will graduate in December, and another one will be leaving for one of these institutions in the next 2 weeks. I'm thankful for the institutions. I'm a supporter. Our family loves these institutions. My boys have enjoyed their experience, and I hope they will continue to enjoy the impact that these institutions are having upon them. My family loves, we support, and we are friends of these places of higher learning. I want my children, I want my grandchildren to attend these institutions. I want to be able to trust that they are being supported and coming to grapple with a biblical worldview.
Point of order, please. Speaker coming to mic 2.
Mr. Chairman, Mike Baker, Cleveland, Tennessee. My point of order, Mr. Chairman, is that the member is addressing higher education institutions. And it's not talking about the motion, which includes churches and other areas. I'm not aware of the accusations that may be being made here, but I'd like to make sure that we do not taint the spirit and the knowledge of this body regarding all of the educational institutions of the Church of God, and that we deal with the motion that is before us.
Thank you, Mr. Member. Point is well taken. Let me ask the speaker to please refrain your comments or hold your comments to the motion itself.
I'd be glad to. So what I would say to this body is that we are not ignorant, but we are somewhat uninformed. And what we don't know, that we don't know, can harm us. Or we are naive, thinking that the issue at hand is not that bad, and it will not affect us that much. I'm sensitive to the challenges that all of us in ministry are facing, very sensitive. Having ministered in the Atlanta area for 32 years, I'm well aware of the cultural pressures we're all facing. I remain supportive of these places, the platforms, the places of trust in our tribe, and I'm appreciative of the recent statements and actions that give me hope that these issues will be dealt with. Let me say,
I am so sorry, but you have timed out
Thank you.
the speech. Thank you so much. Let's move to mic number 10. Speaker at mic 10.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I speak against this amendment, this motion. Thank you. Chris Thomas, Athens, Tennessee. I'm speaking against this motion. As I look at it, I'm struck by how driven by fear that it is. We seem to be afraid of what's going on in the world around us. We seem to be afraid of one another. What's going on in the world around us, we decide to condemn. And what's going on among us, we choose to threaten. In neither of these are we rising to the occasion to minister to this world. We have brothers and sisters in this gathering who have children and other loved ones who fall into the categories that we are forbidding people to speak of, and through tears and heartbreak, they have sought to maintain redemptive relationships in the hope that Paul is right when he says that a believing spouse can sanctify an unbelieving spouse, and that a believing parent can sanctify an unbelieving child. I cannot imagine the heartbreak that these brothers and sisters experience. They're hoping through their relationships that God will intervene. And what we are saying in the threats of this peace is that we're going to make it more difficult for these brothers and sisters to continue to minister in a redemptive way to their children. I find it odd that at a time when our Pentecostal identity is under attack and people struggle with tongues as initial evidence and have basically given up on preaching about sanctification and holiness of life, and where large swaths of our church have no spiritual
Point of order,
gifts.
please. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, there is a point of order at mic 3.
Can we please speak to the motion and not the general state of preaching in the church?
All right, I will encourage the speaker to speak to the motion.
I am, sir. In a situation where we're losing what has made us what we are, this is where we decide to draw the punitive line. What does that say about us? What does that say about our priorities? What does it say about being Pentecostal? This measure is not a redemptive measure. This measure complicates our life in ministry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have a speaker at mic 2.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Jeffrey Lambert, 52 years from Michigan and 8 months from Virginia. I would like to speak today and move that we postpone this matter until further in-depth legal study and consideration has been completed to determine the liability concerns for our pastors, our churches, and to determine the risk of future legal actions that may be levied against our churches, leadership, and overall denomination as it relates to wrongful terminations. And if I can get that seconded, I would like to speak to it.
All right, this is to postpone indefinitely. Is this what I'm hearing?
To postpone until further in-depth legal study and consideration has been completed.
I understand. Is there a second? There is a second. Would you like to speak further to this motion?
I would, thank you. While I humbly respect all of my fellow brothers that have worked diligently to put these things together, I would like to just humbly offer a perspective that maybe has been overlooked. I believe many ministers, pastors, not only oversee churches, but they have ministries that are outside of the four walls of their churches. In my situation, my small part of the world, we also run 2 daycares and early learning centers that are under my supervision and under the umbrella of the church. If this measure is passed, not only will I be forced to vet all of our future employees that would seemingly have to be Church of God and align with all of our beliefs, but it would on the backside also challenge me with possible legal ramifications. We would have to ask discriminatory questions in interviews, but follow up if, for say, a custodian in one of my daycares makes a post on social media that they have now changed their position of how they see themselves. I would be forced by this measure to call them in for disciplinary action and possible dismissal or face disciplinary action from our denomination. It puts us in a place where we are potentially facing lawsuits. I've spoken with multiple attorneys on this, and while I believe in doing the right thing, I believe we can do the right thing the wrong way and put ourselves in harm's way. Thank you.
All right, we are now speaking to the motion to postpone. It is amendable, it is debatable, and would require a majority vote. So please, if you're coming to a mic or at a mic, are you ready to speak to the motion to postpone? Let's go to speaker at mic 4. Are you speaking to the motion?
Yeah, Dale Coulter, Chattanooga, Tennessee. Yes, I will speak in favor of the motion to postpone. I am speaking in favor of this motion for a number of reasons. Number one, I share the concern of my brother that this is going to have legal ramifications. The language of the current motion is ambiguous when it says any employee of any church or institution of the church. It's not defined there in any specific way. The language is what it is. It would have to be tested in order to figure out what it actually says if this body passed it, which is why I'm in favor of deferring it for more thorough examination, because in its current configuration, it seems to be very broad-reaching to include if you worked in a Catholic institution or other institutions that are governed by any church body whatsoever, or the institution of any church body. It's even more broad sweeping than that when it says ministers are prohibited and must prohibit their employees. We are not told where those ministers work or what employees are underneath them. Once again, it's very broad sweeping, it seems to me. I have friends who are military chaplains who have multiple chaplains underneath them. They wonder how this could be applied to them with those military chaplains underneath them. Are they now responsible to police their language? They can't even do that in accordance with military. It would put them into an impossible situation. I have spoken to a friend who is the chief officer of mission integration at a Catholic hospital system in Arkansas. He said the Catholic Church clearly teaches against gender transformation, but there's no way they could implement this. And any Church of God person who signed up for this Catholic hospital could not be hired given this, because they believe that you have to minister in the context. And it may call for some different approach in that context. This, to me, goes to the need to refer this for further deliberation. The language here, it seems to me, is simply too broad, simply overreaching, and it is not clearly defined. We need to look at it more carefully. We need to define it more carefully. We need to know what we're saying when we say it, because once we unleash this, in my view, the only way it's going to be tested is in the courts, either the legal courts of this land, or God forbid Canada, which doesn't even have the rights that we do, or in the church courts, because no one is going to be able to define any church until a trial board comes along and has to figure out what that exactly means in accordance with Church of God teachings. I would prefer a much more specific, more pointed statement. Let me be clear where I am on this. I am a son of the church, just like many of you. I am a fourth-generation Church of God minister. My great-grandfather came in under A.J. Tomlinson at Pleasant Grove camp meeting before there was a Waimama. A member of my family has been at Lee University for every decade since the 1940s. I believe in the Church of God. I've given my life to the Church of God. I came back to Pentecostal Theological Seminary in 2020 because I wanted to sow into the church. I want to stand firm on the Word of God. It is infallible. I believe that. I have always believed it. I have never altered or deviated. I will not alter or deviate it, not because I'm afraid of someone, but because I know I will stand before God one day. So let there be no mistake as to where I am personally, professionally, theologically. I believe in the Word. I stand on the Word. What it says about men and women, it says about men and women. What it says about marriage, it says about marriage. One of my good friends is Rob Gagnon, who teaches at Houston Baptist. Rob has written the book defending the biblical view of homosexuality and what the Bible really says. I reached out to Rob last night. I said, Rob, what do you think about this? And Rob said to me, look, you've got to think about what Jesus says about the eunuch, someone born eunuch. That means someone who is intersex, possibly. Rob is saying this. Rob is a conservative
Mr. Member,
evangelical.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you have reached your maximum time.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
All right, we have a speaker at mic 9. We're still speaking on the motion to refer. Speaker at mic 9.
I'm speaking on the motion to refer, and I'm in favor of that. My name is Richard Pace from Cleveland, Tennessee. There are a couple of reasons. Several of them have been mentioned, and I won't go into detail, but just refer to those quickly. One, I am totally behind the intent to make sure our denominational churches and our denominational institutions uphold our denominational beliefs. But this particular motion, as I know these things are difficult to work on, does not take into perspective other areas that will be effective, and I believe it gets to the point where we begin to violate Scripture. Let me say what I mean. This motion needs to be referred to be refined, because even though it's clear, it refers to Church of God minister in the very beginning. As noted, it also includes employee of any church. Now, I won't say that again, but it has been noted. But also down in line 6, when it talks of ministers, it assumes that is Church of God, are prohibited and must prohibit their employees. This again does not say Church of God employees. We've had a couple of examples, but we have many bivocational ministers who work in secular locations. It may be Walmart, their local police department. It may be any industry. And if they are there supervising anyone, we are demanding that they prohibit their employees from doing anything that violates Church of God belief and doctrine. I think that is not an appropriate thing. One, if we're going to do that, we need to set aside a legal defense fund of multiple $million to be able to help these people with their lost wages when they take this stand, and two, to help them defend their position through our court system to get resolution. But more importantly than that, I am the director of the Chaplains Commission. I want to clarify about how this affects chaplains. When it comes to Church of God military chaplains, which I know most people, that's the first thing that comes to your mind, our military chaplains are already covered by maintaining Church of God doctrine. Congress has put in Title 10 a law of our nation that no military chaplain can be required to do anything that violates their church's doctrine or even their personal conscience. So I don't worry about Church of God military chaplains with anything that we measure. This needs to be refined in order that we can protect our other chaplains.
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, I'm hearing a point of order. Can someone identify, please? Mic 1.
Joey Grizzle, Buford Church of God, North Georgia. The motion to refer is so broad that everyone is using it as an opportunity to speak to the original motion. I really wish that we could contextualize this conversation to just what is before us legislatively. We're trying to determine whether or not we should refer this for further study. Hearing about personal testimonies and great-grandfathers and whether or not chaplains are going to be affected may be more impactful when we speak to the motion, but has nothing to do with referring this to a later date.
Thank you, Mr. Member. The point is well taken. We will need to speak to the motion. Actually, it is a motion to postpone. The chair was incorrect in referring it to a motion to refer, but it is a motion to postpone, as I believe it was been rendered to us. Back to Speaker at mic 9 with those instructions.
But I beg your pardon, Mr. Moderator. I'm doing my best to explain why I think it needs to be postponed in order to be perfected so that it does not raise complications for us. The area that I have most concern regarding chaplains are those who work in a secular context. This needs to be perfected, and if it's postponing is a way to do that. And I have in mind, just for example, we have 3 times as many chaplains working in other areas than the military. We have a large number working in hospice. Many times a Church of God chaplain is the last minister of the gospel a person interacts with before they leave this world to go to the Lord and stand before Him. If I, as a hospice Church of God chaplain, in order to connect and relate and witness and talk to someone about their soul, I don't care if they want to be called Jack or Jill or him or her or it. I will call them whatever they want to be called to be able to interact with them. This motion does not take into effect how it will impact the mission of this church to reach the lost effectively, and that's why I support this, sending it for revision.
Thank you, Mr. Member.
Thank you,
Your
Mr.
time has expired. Let's go to a question at mic 3.
Yes, Mr. Moderator, Kip Box, Fenton, Michigan. I would like to request a point of information. Would it be permissible, Mr. Moderator, for our legal counsel, Dennis Watkins, to speak to this?
The chair will allow for that if Mr. Watkins would make himself available and let me know what mic he's going to, the main floor. At mic 3.
Mr. Chairman, I want to make sure before I speak that I'm relevant. I desire to speak to language in the motion and not to the motion for postponement.
All right. I would suggest then that you wait until the main motion is back on the floor. Thank you. All right, we are continuing to talk about the motion to postpone. Let's move to mic 6. There is a point of order.
Mike 8. The motion is to postpone until we can hear from our legal counsel. Would that not make it relevant to hear from Dennis Watkins, our legal counsel?
Thank you, Mr. Member. I don't recall that being in that motion. Let me ask the proposer. You need to speak exactly what you said. What was your motion? At mic 2, please.
My adrenaline just settled down. I didn't want to get back up here, so quickly.
We can help you with that.
I move that we postpone this matter until further in-depth legal study and consideration has been completed to determine the liability concerns for our pastors and churches, and to determine the risks of future legal actions that may be levied against our church's leadership and overall denomination as it relates to wrongful terminations.
All right. With that in mind, I am going to permit legal to speak to this at this time. I think it will help. At mic 3.
Mr. Chairman, I do not speak to the word disciplinary that was mentioned by the earlier member. I consider that an ecclesiastical term that this body can deal with in the formation or interpretation of that motion. But I would like to speak regarding a narrow legal issue relating to this item, and I do not express any opinion for or against the passage of this item. That is a matter for this body to decide. But I would like to point out my concern over a phrase in the measure on page B39, line 14, and I'm pointing out the phrase or wording, non-credentialed employees. This wording causes me concern from a legal standpoint. I am concerned that this term is overbroad in its wording. Generally, churches can regulate credentialed ministers under all employment laws, federal, state, and local at this time. But church employers are subject to federal, state, and local laws that prohibit discrimination on the basis of certain categories, race, sex, or national origin. In 2020, the United States Supreme Court decision in Bostick versus Clayton County generally prohibits discrimination under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. Numerous states and local governments have taken measures to implement the holdings of this case and are doing so now. Thankfully, churches enjoy a general exemption from Title VII because they are religious organizations. But courts around the country are in dispute as to how far this exemption extends. All courts recognize this exemption for credentialed ministers, but the courts are not in agreement regarding employees who are not clearly ministers. We hope that everyone working in our churches is performing ministry. But what about, as has been mentioned, custodial employees, maintenance employees, technical employees, security employees, clerical employees, IT employees, or others? Their standing under these rules is not clear, and there is active litigation on this subject. I am of the opinion, Mr. Chairman, that statutes or laws in the following states could create problems regarding treatment of non-credentialed church employees on this issue: California, New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, New Jersey, and possibly other states. The question is, who is a minister and who is conveying the church's message under these federal, state, and local laws? Until this narrow question comes before the United States Supreme Court again, churches should use job descriptions and other means possible to classify as many employees as they can to fall under the category of ministers. So in my opinion, we have a potential legal problem with this language in some states. I've tried to warn of this potential problem. Now, what is a possible solution? I would wish that this overbroad language could be amended and refined to say, credentialed employees or any employees connected with conveying the message of the church or carrying out its mission. Under the cases that have dealt with this question, this exact wording is the standard that the United States Supreme Court has recognized as church employees who are exempted from these employment laws. The specific cases, Hosanna Tabor versus EEOC, and especially Our Lady of Guadalupe School versus Morrissey in 2020. And I think am advised that right now incorporating this language as suggested would provide our best defense as from becoming a test case in this area of law. Once again, if allowed by this body, I would prefer that we delete the last sentence on page 39, beginning with the word failure, and insert the following: failure of credentialed ministers to prohibit their employees of denominationally affiliated institutions or churches under their authority from engaging in this behavior is grounds for disciplinary action. Employees shall be defined as credentialed employees or any employees connected with conveying the message of the church and carrying out its mission. That's actually more broad, Mr. Chairman, than the term non-credential ministers. Once again, I do not speak either for or against this measure, but only to the narrow legal issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have a speaker at mic number 6.
Yes, sir. I would like to speak
Please
in favor.
identify yourself, please.
My name is Mitchell Toll Jr., and I'm from Kentucky, Mr. Moderator. I would like to speak in favor of postponing the amendment if we could, or postponing the motion. This motion presents 4 challenges as it currently is written. The motion within its first and second sentences transitions from the use of self-selected gender to sexual temptation and their unbiblical sexual action, which offers 2 specific concerns, though not well executed. These specific concerns need to be addressed deliberately, intentionally, and singularly. Second, the motion does not define the word affirming, thus leaving this motion for a very broad interpretation. Third, the daunting responsibility that this would place on the local pastor to know and be held accountable for every action of those under their authority. And then lastly, the lack of research that has gone into determining the impact this motion may have on our bivocational ministers who are working and ministering in a non-Christian world, quite frankly, ministering in Babylon. My hesitation is not with the intent of the motion, of which I firmly agree, but rather with the motion's unintentional implications. These concerns are not about the economics, but the opportunity to be able to minister that would be removed as a result. Quite frankly, my daughter is a practicing attorney, and whenever I began to talk to her about this, she said this wouldn't pass L1 the first year of law school. She said simply whenever a law is written or a bylaw is written, we need to know what the infraction is, who judges the infraction, and what is the penalty of said infraction. None of these are met, thus further review and rewriting is needed. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Member. The chair is trying to balance the speeches as we move along, and at this point, there have been 4 in favor of the postponement. No one has spoken against the postponement. My record keepers are telling me. So to move us along, I'm going to ask where we are as we go to each speaker, whether you are for or whether you're against. I do want to balance it, and no one at this time has spoken against it. Let's go to speaker at mic 2. Are you for or against?
I'm against.
You're against postponing?
Yes.
All right, you may speak.
John Moats, North Georgia. We do not need to postpone this. We need to act and act today. This has already been studied, but we need to speak against this postponement, and let's move on with the business that is needed to help us to move forward as a church.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let's go to a speaker at mic 4. Are you speaking for or against postponement?
I'm speaking for postponement, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you for understanding. Let's move to mic 8. Are you speaking for or against?
Mr. Chairman, I'm speaking against it. Ken Hall, Alabama. I recently, in the last 6 months, had to deal with a situation where I had a voluntary staff member that, as we'd say, came out of the closet and was irritated by a sermon I preached dealing with some of the problems we're having in our society and woke culture. I don't think we can risk not having something in writing. When I did, the person protested, and I went and talked with an attorney, and the first thing the attorney asked me is there anything in your bylaws that your denomination states that you would take this position? We didn't have it. There's a lot of people talking about how easy this is to just postpone it. We're in greater risk if we don't do something now. Now, I'm not saying it might be perfect, but I didn't have that declaration from the denomination to stand with me. I had to kind of deal with it from a personal, scriptural viewpoint, we got through it, thank the Lord, but we need this. We don't need to postpone this. We need it desperately.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let's move to mic 12. Are you speaking for postponement or against postponement?
Against postponement.
All right, please.
I believe this is time that we need to take a stand. I've listened to the conversations, I've listened to some of our educators, and I've listened to the ambiguity of where we stand on these issues. We've talked about backing down from a legal fight.
Yourself. I'm sorry. Please identify yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. We are Eastern North Carolina.
Thank you.
All right, we're good. But it's time that we have something concrete that we're going to stand for. If you work for our church or for our organization, as long as it fits the description of the amendment that I think should be added, and that's why we don't need to postpone this and we need to work that out, is we need something to stand on. We need to be able to move forward in right and not back down because we're afraid of a lawsuit. Our organizations, our churches, and our educational institutions need to abide by what we say, whether it's a daycare or church or whatever. You have them sign off that they're working at a Church of God institution, and you'll abide by our laws and regulations. So I think we need to vote on this today. We need to move forward on it, and we need to have something to stand on and hold people accountable for before we leave.
Thank you, Mr. Member. We go to speaker at mic 1. Are you speaking for postponement or against postponement?
I'm speaking against postponement. Please. Travis Johnson, Mobile, Alabama. This motion is among the most vetted motions on this agenda. This motion has been dealt with by the Executive Council spanning 2021 and 2022. Our top legal counsel has spoken into this. Voices well recognized in this room, voices like Matt Staver, founder of Liberty University Law School and the Liberty Council, when we asked if we could openly discriminate against people based on their gender identity or their affirmation, any kind of ideology like that. He said 100% yes, you can. You just have to assert yourself in doing that. And proof is, go look at Bob Jones University. It's not even gender identity. You can't play cards at Bob Jones University. We have to assert ourselves.
Mr. Chairman, if
we
I may,
can
very
openly
quickly,
discriminate. Additionally, speaking
Mr.
back
Member,
to...
let me very quickly remind you we're coming up on adjournment. Just be aware of that, please.
Okay, if I could use the rest of my time, please. The issue concerning non-credentialed, non-ministerial employees being outside of the control or the reach of the institutional leader like the pastor or the president or some kind of director actually is the reason that Charlotte Catholic lost their discrimination lawsuit, because they were Catholic in their religious teaching, but not in their math class. So when their math teacher came out affirming and he was dealt with, they had not been dealing with those people, so they were in trouble because of that reason. Had they dealt with that across the board, there would have been no problem. Since then, there are multiple cases, including, the coach praying openly, et cetera. We cannot discriminate against our employees, even of public schools. Public school teachers cannot be forced, we know this, by legal case, they cannot be forced to recognize an untruth and use some self-selected gender pronoun. Now, concerning non-credentialed employees, they're a part of the problem that we're trying to deal with, actually. A credentialed minister can be brought before the church. A member of a church can be brought before the church. But a non-credentialed minister who is working in a institution or ministry of the church that is also not a member of a Church of God, that say is attending church that is not in alignment with us, and they write things that are not appropriate.
State your point of order, please. And where is it? At mic 12.
I love you, Brother Travis, but let's stick to the motion that is to go back and not to the original motion. He sounds like he is giving a good defense for that, but right now it's just a matter of should we send it or postpone it until those matters he is talking of can be properly addressed and brought back to this body.
The point of order is well taken. While I'm pausing here, let me test the body if you would like to extend the session to allow the speaker to finish his time. By general consent, all right, please continue and stick to the motion to postpone.
Thank you, Brother Moderator. I'm appreciative of everyone that has touched on these. The disciplinary action that we are arguing to postpone for further study would actually stop non-credentialed, non-members from functioning outside of constraint. This is about our church. This is about our institution, our employees. And let me also mention something that one of the previous speakers stated, that this is about employees generally. No, this motion says no Church of God minister shall permit any employee of any church or institution. So this is not speaking to a Church of God ministers leading a construction company and managing those people's speech. These are for people of the church. And they shouldn't be forced. Our ministers should not be forced to deny theology and teaching and doctrine of the church in deference to some secular agenda being forced on us. Now concerning, and I'll close with this, the vetting. This motion was overwhelmingly passed and placed on this agenda. This motion was already referred to a special committee of our top leaders, including former general overseers. It was overwhelmingly placed on the agenda. The motion to refer in executive council was overwhelmingly rejected and placed on agenda. And we cannot allow 2 more years of using self-selected gender pronouns or affirming unbiblical sexualities being pushed on our people so that we can figure out what little piece needs to be handled. We need to speak. First, we were told there is no problem. Then it was there is no problem. They're isolated problems. Then it was trusted people need to handle this problem. We should speak to this problem, and we should speak clearly. We should do it today.
Thank you, Mr. Member. Gentlemen, we have reached 2 minutes past the time of adjournment. Would you stand, please? We will take this up after our lunch break. God bless you. Enjoy your time of refreshment, and we will reconvene at 1:30. God bless.